Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. As you probably know, my name's Adrian Gilbert, and I've written a lot of books, and one of the ones that I wrote way back in 1995 was this one, Magi, and it's very much concerned with the whole story of the three wise men, and I thought we'd talk about that today because I showed you this picture in one of my lectures just recently. This picture was done by my friend Bengt Alfredsson, a Swedish painter who sadly passed away a few years ago. And he did it as an illustration for that book. And I thought it'd be rather fun, given that we're coming up to Christmas, to go through some of what that's all about. The Christmas story. And if we look here, you've all seen pictures like this. There's thousands of them, generally called the Adoration of the Magi or some title like that, where you have the sort of the Virgin Mary with the child and Joseph hovering nearby. You've got the three wise men. There's always one of them who's kneeling down and he's either handing a gift or kissing the foot of the child, and two others who are standing back a bit. There's usually a cow or ox in the stable, because they're in the stable there, and sometimes there's some shepherds around and some angels. But it's an archetypal picture of the Adoration of the Magi, and we all know it. It's on thousands and millions of Christmas cards. Perhaps not so much nowadays, because most of them are all about Father Christmas or getting drunk or, pagan themes. The Christianity seems to be steadily draining out of Christmas to the point where you probably have to call it Happy Holidays these days. You're not allowed to say Happy Christmas anymore. It might offend someone. Well, if they get offended by me saying Happy Christmas, then I'm only too happy to offend. I think some people have skins which are way too thin. Anyway, leaving that aside, we all know this picture of the archetypal story of the Adoration of the Magi, and that's been something I've puzzled over all my life, ever since I was one of the three kings in a nativity play, probably about age 7 or 8. And, stuck in my mind. And my friend John and I, we cycled to Bethlehem to be there at Christmas time. We did our own adoration. Arrived there, it was snowing, it was cold, we couldn't get into church because it was packed. Saw Harold Wilson being led in, former Prime Minister of Great Britain. He was Prime Minister at the time. And but we were left outside in the snow, but listening to the choirs and looking at the plastic star they had hanging over Manger Square. Anyway, I thought we'd go through this and we'll have a look and see how to decode this picture, because it is actually a code and it has some very interesting repercussions. Now, to start our story here, I'll just put my glasses on. With this gentleman, G.I. Gurdjieff, who's been a major influence on me. I regard him as one of my teachers. And your teachers don't have to be still in the body, You can be connected in some funny way in the spirit. And I regard him as one of my teachers. And he brought it to the English language. Well, I don't know if it was English when he brought it, but he brought the idea of what he called legominisms. That if people want to pass on a message, the best way to do it is to put it into popular culture and allow popular culture to keep it alive. And he said this could be done through paintings or art in one form or another, or even things like playing cards, which carry on certain esoteric ideas are preserved in the ordinary pack of playing cards. So I thought, well, actually this Three Wise Men is a typical example of one of these, what he called legominisms, and perhaps it could be decoded. And this was not just a whim on my part. I had a good idea of what we might be looking for. So anyway, legominism, here's his definition. One of the meanings existing there is of transmitting from generation to generation information about certain events of long past ages through just those three-brained beings, that's humans, who are thought worthy to be and who are called initiates. Right? He has a book called All and Everything, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. The Beelzebub is a sort of tongue-in-cheek reference, and he better not insult the devil or he won't. his book will come to grief. He's not a devil worshipper or anything like that. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. The archetypal story of the visit of the three kings to the stable in Bethlehem is a legominism. The question for me was how to decode it. Now then, in the Matthew Gospel, the wise men are called Magi, and the Magi were the priesthood or wise men of the Zoroastrian religion. This was very widely practiced in ancient times. It was the state religion of Persia, but also throughout most of Central Asia, Mesopotamia, and also Armenia. The Armenians were Zoroastrians in ancient times. And the Magi were fire worshippers, but more especially they were astrologers. They studied the heavens for portents, especially the birth of important personages. They were expecting a messianic birth, hence following the stars. So I'll just say a word or two there. You know how when a Dalai Lama's died and they want to know who the next one is, they send out search parties for children who've been born at that certain time, and then they show them objects that belong to the last Dalai Lama, and they pick them out and say, yeah, that is clearly the next one, the next Dalai Lama. Well, there seems to be something similar going on with this search of the Magi. They've seen portents in the sky, they're expecting a king to be born, and then they're following the star. Now, when I wrote the book, as you'll see, I very much believe the star was actually a conjunction of two planets, Jupiter and Saturn, close together. I've actually revised my views on that now. I still think that conjunction is very important, but I now think that what they were following was a ball of light. You have to understand that our word star, astra in Latin or aster in Greek, ast actually in Egyptian, means a light. It doesn't necessarily mean a star. It can mean a light. So the ancients looked at the stars and they believed there were lights in the sky. So they could be following this ball of light, rather like the Israelites following a pillar of fire when they're in the book of Exodus and they're travelling along. During the daytime they follow, I think it's a pillar of smoke in the daytime, but it's a pillar of fire at night, so presumably you can't see the flames during the day. But anyway, I think they were probably following a ball of light, and that is often a way that angels are said to manifest themselves in their sort of angelic form as a light. So it could well be that they were following this ball of light, and then the ball of light comes over the stable. It's the sort of angel they've been following. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. That's just a thought. But the Magi were fire worshippers, and they studied astrology, so they're expecting a king to be born. Now then, the full story of the three kings, including their names, comes from Armenian sources, right? So the Armenians are kind of connected with this legominism, this preservation of wisdom being passed on through art and through common culture, you could call it. So in the story, that the three kings have names. You can see them on the picture here. Melchior, that means king of gold or golden king. Well, one of the kings brings gold, doesn't he? So that must be Melchior. That was me in the in the nativity I did at age 8 or whatever it was, 7. Caspar, I think, probably comes from Caspian. Therefore, the Caspian Sea is next to Media, part of Persia. So I think he was probably a Mede from Media. And Balthasar means Lord who protects the king, which is a Babylonian name. Babylonians, lived in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates, lower Mesopotamia. So he probably came from there. He might have been protecting a lord who protects the king there. Although there weren't kings at the time when the Magi were coming, the Babylonians had been wiped out or taken over by other forces, Persians. But anyway, he'd be from Mesopotamia. Now, Gurdjieff was half Armenian, right? So again, we're getting this connection with Armenians and Armenia. And Armenia at that time, or not his time, but in ancient times, was much larger and encompassed much of what is now eastern Turkey, including Mount Ararat and Lake Van. I'll show you those in a minute. And historically, it's had several capitals. Most famous is Ani, the city of 1,000 churches. And today, Ani, or what's left of it, the ruins of Ani, is a disputed border area between Turkey and Armenia. Now, until very recently, that was totally out of bounds. Maybe it is again now, I don't know. Because very sensitive border there. The Turks really don't like the Armenians and vice versa. In fact, the Turks, this is controversial, but there is what was called the Armenian massacres, the genocide of the Armenian people that took place during the First World War. The Turks don't acknowledge that they'd carried out genocide on the Armenians, but the Armenians claim that 1 million people were killed at that time. And interestingly, well, it's not interesting, it's sadly actually, when I went to that part of Turkey, I went to Urfa, or Sanliurfa, or Şanlıurfa, I think is how the Turks pronounce it. It's the ancient city of Edessa, as it would have been called in Christian times. Was a major Christian centre, really major, one of the top ones, like Antioch and Constantinople and Alexandria. I mean, Edessa was right up there, and it's said to be the first city to have become Christian shortly after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. I won't go into that story. It's all in my book, Magi. When we went there, I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find any Christians, and if there are any still there, they're hiding. They're hiding. The churches are all gone. They've all been demolished. All that we saw was the ruins of a church of St. John. That looked like, the roof was off. It wouldn't be there for much longer. They'll demolish it. I thought that was terribly sad, that this once wonderful city, which had 3 cathedrals in it at one time, there's now hardly a trace there of anything Christian at all. And the people, the Armenians who lived there, certainly up until the First World War, have all gone. So you've got to wonder, where did they go? Anyway, that's an aside. So historically, it's had several capitals. That's Armenia. Most famous, Ani, the city of 1,000 churches. And early Roman times, the capital was Nisibis, which today is called Zabin, and that's in Turkey on the border with Syria and close to Iraq. Now, after studying Gurdjieff's second book, which is called Meetings with Remarkable Men, the first one was that one I said earlier, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, I determined to find a place he claimed he had been shown an ancient map of what he called pre-sand Egypt. And again, I'm not going to go into that because it's all in my book, and I'll probably do other lectures on that sometime anyway. But Gurdjieff was in search of an ancient brotherhood. So Gurdjieff, perhaps for political, religious reasons, hides its identity. However, he tells of a letter between old Armenian priests he found at Arni. And this discovery takes him on a journey, the discovery of the letters, that is. And he's looking for the remnants of a famous Christian brotherhood he calls the Sarmung, or Sarman. And the letters mention a place called Nivsi, and his journey terminates at a town he refers to as En. He doesn't say it's Nivsi, he just calls it En. And most commentators think this was in Iraqi Kurdistan, particularly Bennett thought that, J.G. Bennett. But I realised it must be Nizibis, which is a near anagram of Nivsi. And you have to understand that in Latin, B's and V's are often confused one for the other. So something that's called a Nizibis could also be Nizivis, a Nizivis, a Nivsi, are very close near anagrams. So I think that that's where he was going, but he concealed the identity of that because when he was writing, these pogroms were still going on in Turkey, and he didn't want to risk identifying the Armenian community that he had stayed with when he went there. Now, I've got a little map here, and this map you can see at the top there, Arni, which is where the Thousand Church ruins. It's not 1,000 really, but there's an awful lot of them. Arni. Kars above that is where Gurdjieff himself was born. Alexandropol is a city, they've renamed it. I forget what it's called. It's not Leninikan, it's a different one. Oh, it was Leninikan. They've changed the name again. That's in Armenia today. And he went there, he took the maps. He found the letters in Arni. He took them to Alexandropol to have them translated. And then he and a friend went on a big journey down through Mount Ararat. And they sort of passed through Zakho, and I believe they went west, not east, from there, through Kizre, which is where you cross over the Tigris River, to Nizivis, which is now called Nuzebin. And I went there with my wife. And this is what you would see there today, ancient Nizibis. This is my picture. It's right on the Syrian border. I think it's probably been changed a lot. I was there in 95, and they've had wars and problems. They've had ISIS just over the border. They've had the Turks putting down the KK, what they called PKK, the separatists who want to split away from Turkey. Kurds, that is, the Turkish Kurds, and there's Iraqi Kurds and Syrian Kurds. They want to start or have their own country of Kurdistan, but none of those three other countries, Syria, Iraq or Turkey, will let them. So it's very likely a lot of this has been destroyed in all the troubles. Anyway, there's an old church there. You wouldn't recognise that that's a church, but we were taken there and shown it. And on top of it, you can see that it sort of has what's a priest flat on top. That's what that sort of big square bit on top is. And inside the church, it's very old. You can see it's really old. I mean, this is going back to Byzantine times, I'm sure. I mean, because once the Muslim invasions had taken place of this area, people weren't allowed to build churches. They're forbidden. So whatever church you had, if you were lucky enough that it hadn't been destroyed, that's what you got, and that's what you hang on to as much as you can. And it looks to me, it's very, very blackened inside. I think there have been some fires in there. Very probably had been burnt at some time or other. I don't know when. And there's hardly anything, well, there's nothing of value in there. Just a small cross and a few bits of cloth, as you can see. And I think it's run by the Syrian church, and the Syrian Christians are now, they're being exterminated as we speak. You know, they've come under huge pressure with the whole Syrian wars that have occurred lately, and then the Syrian church in Iraq, in Syria, in Turkey, the whole lot, all being squeezed out and destroyed, and this building very likely has been destroyed as well by now. Anyway, this is on the top, and Gurdjieff talks about how he stayed with a priest at this place called N, which is where he found the map of what he called pre-San Turkey. Well, I didn't see any map of pre-San Turkey there. I wasn't expecting to, but that I think is where he stayed. And the interesting thing is that after he'd been there, he immediately made a beeline. In his book, he says this, a beeline for Egypt. So the next chapter is all about his time in Egypt. So, as you know, I believe Egypt is very much connected with Christianity. And I'm not just talking about the Coptic Church, but ancient Egypt. And we're going to go into that further in later lectures. I've got a lot to tell you about that, discoveries I've made. But anyway, this is where I think Gurdjieff found his map. So if anyone's interested in Gurdjieff, this is an important story. So that brings us back to the actual painting, and here is what it looks like. You know, when I've photographed it and put it up there, so you can see it properly. And this was done by my friend Bengt Alfredson. And you can see you've got the baby in the manger, you've got Mary, you've got the midwife next to her, behind her Joseph, and there's an ox. One of the kings is leaning over the cot, or it's actually the manger, isn't it, where the animal food would have been. And he's bringing his gift of gold. And you've got two other kings in the background there, and you've got some shepherds. You can hardly see them because it's a sort of nighttime coming into dawn picture. This, so you've got three shepherds behind there, and you can see there's a sheep there, and there's a cockerel, and there's a beehive. Actually, you can see just next to that king. I'll explain why that's there shortly. So this is actually a very symbolic painting which Bengt did for me on my instructions, and I'm going to go through it with you now and explain what it all symbolises and means, because it's basically a description of the sky as it was on the day when I believe that Jesus was actually born. Now, I'm not going to explain here why I think that is the day. It's quite a long arguments, quite a lot of arguments to reach that, but it's all in my book Magi. But I think he was actually born on July the 29th, 7 BC. And on that day, the sun would have been in Leo, and he's supposed to be a lion of the tribe of Judah. Well, the tribe of Judah was the lion tribe. So Jesus would have been a Leo, I think. So we're going to go through the symbolism of these stars, because I think what they were preserving, these the Armenians, they had been Zoroastrians, they converted to Christianity fairly early on as well, but they had certain traditions and knowledge of their own, which were preserved by this Sarmung Brotherhood. And I think I know who they were, but again, I'm not going to go into that because we haven't got time at this point. But you can see we have the sun conjunct Regulus in Leo, and that symbolises Jesus in the manger. Leo is the Judah tribe, Regulus is Bethlehem. Bethlehem is house of bread. Sirius is the star of his mother Mary. And then you've got the midwife, who's Procyon. Orion symbolises the father, or Joseph, right? And then you have three shepherding stars who shepherds lead the way, and they lead the way of rising earlier than the stars of Leo. Then you have Taurus the ox there, Aries the sheep, that's connected with the shepherds. Then you have what I thought at the time I did this, Star of Bethlehem being Jupiter conjunct Saturn in Pisces. I've actually changed my mind on that. Hang on, it's jumping ahead here. And you've got Mercury as the first king, and he's close to the manger. Always one king is close to the manger, or close to the child, kissing his foot, handing a gift, whatever, usually kneeling down. So you can see the whole thing superimposed here, and this is what I asked Bengt to do, was to superimpose the figures. Now, let's come back there. The thing is that those stars, July the 29th, would be the appropriate time for a king to be born, because that's the conjunction of the sun with Regulus, the royal star, the Lionheart star of Leo. And I did a lot of research on this, but in the Middle East, that was considered the appropriate day for a king to have his royal birthday. Might not have actually been born then, but they could adopt that day. They're very much into this lion symbolism. So we have here as I think it would have been on the 29th of July. But the problem is that at that time, you can't actually see these stars because they're a bit close to the sun. When the sun at dawn, when sun comes out, all the stars disappear, don't they? Even the bright ones. But at Christmas time, now is the best time to see those constellations. And at dusk, at sunset, is when Orion rises now, and you'll see all those stars spread out over the sky. So I thought I'd tell you that so you can enjoy your Christmas. If you have a clear sky, we probably won't have that in England. You know, it's been cloudy here for weeks. We tend to get this cloudy weather, in winter particularly. But we might get the odd day when the clouds are not there and it's a clear sky, a clear, cool, cold night, and we'll be able to see the stars, particularly Orion, rising at sunset. Now, interestingly, I think that same understanding, connection with Orion, is behind the Father Christmas myth, the Santa Claus myth, that Santa and his sleigh going over the rooftops and giving presents to all the children, he's being pulled by a deer. Well, that deer is the constellation that's actually pulling Orion. Orion is right, he's below the ecliptic. He's a southern sky, it's below the ecliptic, the pathway of the sun. But he reaches up with his hand to the point that's right between Taurus and Gemini. And Taurus goes before Orion. You can think of Taurus as being Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, because there's a big red star called Aldebaran in the constellation of Taurus. So in the northern mythology, you can think of the sleigh being pulled by a reindeer. And in the northern mythology, it probably would have been thought of as Woden's chariot or something like that. Father Christmas, because there's great blessings that come at this time of year. So that's what I think. I think Father Christmas is another identification of Orion, and the red that he wears, Father Christmas wears red, is because at sunset the sky might well be red or quite pinkish. When Orion is rising, you would see this red sky with the stars of Orion rising, coming up. So that's one of my thoughts on that subject. Now, I have a present that someone's given me, and I'm so excited by this. Ararat, Mount Ararat, which was in ancient Armenia, and this is Armenian brandy. Would you believe it? Someone's been reading my Magi, I think, and I'm very excited. We're going to drink this at Christmas time, and I shall be toasting old Gurdjieff himself and the Armenians. If you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, do go to the Armenian Cathedral of St. James in the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem. A fantastic place, fantastic atmosphere. all the candles and the incense and the keep singing of the singing the mass, whatever it is in Armenian. Fantastic. And they wear these hoods, which are sort of pointy hoods that represent Mount Ararat, the Armenian homeland, which for them is like the Jews wailing for Jerusalem, that they can't go to their homeland of Jerusalem, of Judea. The Armenians have that same feeling about Ararat and that area of Turkey which they were driven out of. Anyway, so we'll be toasting the Armenians and Gurdjieff with our Armenian brandy over Christmas. So I just thought you would enjoy this little lecture, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll talk again.